Hello. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an idea of the types of questions that can be answered with survey research. Basically discussing the types of questions that show up when you do survey research. The actual development process we'll go through in class. So when designing a questionnaire, the first goal, and this really goes back to everything we've talked about this semester, is that you have to focus on the objectives of the questionnaire. Up until this point, we've really referred to that as the research question. If you don't focus on the research question, or the RQ, then you're really going to be missing some of the key components of what you're trying to obtain by the end of the study. So the types of questions that you would think to yourself would be, what is it that you hope to find by completing the survey? And then hopefully, once you develop a research question, that should lead you to what are the key variables that you need to define and measure. So you can't actually develop your variables until you know what it is that the research question is. After you developed the research question, you go to delimit or operationally define the sample of respondents. We're going to talk about sampling in our next lecture, but when you operationally define, just like we talked about earlier this semester, an operational definition is creating what the scope is within the context of your study. So is this going to be Division III basketball players at Springfield College? Is this going to be employees at a local nonprofit? Is this going to be members of a youth soccer organization? So a whole bunch of different options are available here. After you know who you're going to be asking the questions to, and knowing who is going to be a big part of how you would write the questions, because you're going to write a question very different for a 10-year-old soccer player than you will for a 21-year-old basketball player. So you're going to construct the questionnaire next. This step is the most detailed of all the steps. You really have to be very picky and very smart in your decision making. You'll determine what the content of your questionnaire will be and what each question is going to ask. You really have to think about, are the questions going to get at the content you're interested in? Because once you write the question and give it out to your participants, you're stuck with whatever it is they give back to you. So if you don't give them the right thing in the first place, you're really going to have limited ability at the end of the study. So what I'm going to present predominantly for the rest of this presentation is the different types of questions that are available to you when doing survey research. There are two major categories, open-ended and close-ended. You've seen these all before. Nothing here I'm going to describe to you is going to be shockingly new, but you'll be thinking about them now in terms of research. So an open-ended question does not limit the respondent in any manner. You might ask them, what are the important characteristics of a leader? And you put some lines or a big space for them to fill it in. You could ask them, what are 3 most important success factors for increased efficiency in performance of the high jump? And then they can bullet it, they can write in full sentences, they can answer the question, or they can skip it, as we often have done when we're going through a long survey and we just don't feel like typing a whole lot. That can be the downfall of open-ended questions, is while you can get some really rich information if somebody goes into a lot of detail, or people answer things that you don't necessarily think of, the downside is lots of people tend to skip open-ended questions. Closed-ended questions limit the respondents to a predefined set of responses that the researcher comes up with. There are 4 major categories, which we're going to go through. The first is a Likert scale response, also sometimes pronounced Likert. I think depending on who you talk to, only one is correct, but I've heard both people make strong arguments that Likert or Likert are both correct. You've seen these probably on online questionnaires frequently. This is where there are some form of anchors. Here the anchors are strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. It could be something like not at all, sometimes, frequently, all the time kind of thing. These can be on a scale of 1 to 5. They can be on a scale of 1 to 9. They can be on a scale of 1 to 3. For children, The most appropriate way to write these are sad face, neutral face, and I bet you're guessing happy face. Simply because much more than that, they're not really going to be able to do, that they can associate with the the strong sides, but they're going to have a harder time with something in the middle like 2 and 4. So when you're working with children, usually you'll do something very, very easy along those lines. So my example here, all graduate students in my major should have to take research methods, and you either strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. A ranking question asks participants to rank this from the least important to the most important. For instance, here are a number of different potential collegiate experiences you might have, and the goal would be for the person to say, okay, so the most important to me in college was classes, followed by my experience playing varsity sports, followed by my socializing, followed by my student-teacher relationships, and practicum was least important to me. The downfall in this is that a lot of people don't read directions, so I have frequently seen just check marks. Every once in a while I'll see 2 check marks to indicate maybe more important. I don't know. You can't really number those or count those responses. So their ranking questions are a little bit harder to score, but when people do them correctly, they are very helpful. A categorical response, in compared to a ranking or what we're going to see next, which is a multiple response. Categorical response focuses on choosing one option. Choose your favorite physical education unit, and then, for instance, I might choose basketball. Would be my favorite. So I'd check 1. Again, here you want to make the instructions very clear. Choose 1. Often people times will choose more than 1. Sometimes people skip. You also want to make sure you have this option for other. Please specify, because you want to make sure that people can identify other options that weren't maybe put on the list. In comparison, in multiple response, here you have a whole bunch of different options to choose from. So what type of running events have you participated in the last 12 months? Many long-distance runners don't just participate in one type of thing, so a check all that apply is really helpful here. So they might choose a full marathon, a 5K, and maybe an other because they did in one of these new obstacle course events, like a Rugged Maniac or a Tough Mudder, that kind of thing. But that's where check all that apply can be very helpful when you have situations where it wouldn't make sense for the person to only choose 1. There is another type of item that can be very helpful. It's called a contingency item. This instructs the respondent to skip items that aren't applicable to their situations. And why this is nice is because if a respondent finds that there are items that aren't applicable to them and they're just skipping over them purposely, they have to skip over them or read them and they say, this doesn't fit me, it tends to turn them off and they're not going to fill out the questionnaire. They're just going to stop. So if you really carefully choose your contingency items, you can basically make their lives easier and maybe increase your response rate. And as we discussed in class, response rate is a pretty important component of survey research. But you have to be pretty careful in the construction. If you do online survey research, you can set it up so it'll automatically skip the questions, or you just very carefully write the instructions. An example would be on this next slide. Have you ever used a computer for word processing? If the answer is no, you skip to go to number 3, because if they haven't ever used it and they try to answer question number 2, on average, how many hours a week do you use a computer for word processing? They're just going to put 0 hours, and that's not a very helpful data point. So you can use skip logic, is what it's called in a computer, or a contingency item to make your life a little easier. Well, that's the end of these items. Make sure that you know them in preparation for class and know the differences between them. We'll be working with them a lot in lecture. All right, have a good one.